And God Google says it's a raft of otters. Oh, a raft of otters. Yeah, that sounds nice. So, and Google is omniscient, knows everything, right? And that's knowledge. Knowledge is like that, but it's not wisdom. There's a difference, right? And we're not interested in the collection of clever facts that we can impress people at our cocktail parties that we all go to. but rather our concern is wisdom. But some knowledge is helpful in the path of wisdom. And on these kinds of gatherings, I always assume, and I always say this, that the basics of Buddhist practice are in place. The people are honoring the precepts, that they're trying to share their lives in the way of generosity, whatever resources they have, and that they have a sense of social responsibility, familial responsibility, the foundations of just a good life. And in terms of knowledge or intellectual structure, that there is a basic, has been a basic study of the Four Noble Truths. To me, that's the foundation for Buddhist practice. So if anyone's here who hasn't done that, I always assume that people have done that study. Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, and the different things that come up in right understanding and right effort. So I'm assuming that when I allude to something, you kind of know what I'm alluding to, because having done this for a few years, I don't like to go through, and the Noble Eightfold Path is, and number one is, and I just can't do it anymore, right? So those structures, having said that, those structures are very important. I certainly studied them myself, and they are always in somehow the kind of background framework that I do my contemplative study of myself. Right? So do your homework, as it were, in that way. But I assume most of us have that as a background. So knowledge, that would be knowledge, and so if I like Anoma and Priyani are here right now, and Shanti, and like Anoma will tell me that, yeah, she got top marks in her A levels of Buddhism in high school, but she didn't have a clue. It's just what you say. You say, well, Buddhism, first, right understanding, right thought, blah, 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 blah. You get an A, okay, you pass, but you still suffer. So that's knowledge. But without knowledge, just to dismiss it and throw it out, and then you wouldn't really have the continued the sort of heritage of ideas that we inherit from the time of the Buddha onwards, which are very, very fruitful. And then our task is to apply those ideas to our own existential experience, our own stuff, as we say. So that right understanding, when you look at the Noble Eightfold Path, the first factor is right understanding, and that's not right knowledge. When you have like a word like right understanding or right view, you can misperceive it. Sometimes we do, that there's an answer, like 42 or something. Right? You get an answer, and then that answer, then you have right understanding. But it's not like that, is it? It's more like when I awaken to this moment the way it is now, I understand it. I know what it is. I can define it as being good, bad, indifferent, liking or not liking, but the awakening to this moment just as it is not a concept. It's not a judgment. It's not a Buddhist position even, right? It's not like, it's like this is Christian, Buddhist, or Islamic, or Hindu, or atheist, or humanitarian. It's just like this. And that's one way of looking at right understanding. It's always present, here and now. And that's the idea of Dharma. The Dharma is the way things are, present, known, here and now, not a matter of time. And so when we take refuge in Dharma, some people misconstrue that to be to take refuge in a dogma or a doctrine. Without dismissing the doctrine that we have, when you really know that this is how it is, and you acknowledge that, then that's refuge in Dharma. And again, that's not sectarian. It's not Mahayana Dharma. It's not Hinayana Dharma. It's not Vajrayana Dharma. It's not Zen Dharma. It's not Christian Dharma. It's just the way things are. And that's the beauty of it. It's not sectarian. It's not separative. And I could agree with anyone that it's like this. Now, their experience of it's like this might be different than mine, right? So it's like this for me might be feeling quite peaceful with my cup of pu'er tea and talking with friends in this strange format called Zoom, right? Another person might have just lost a family member and they'd be grieving because someone died. So the particular individual experience of Dharma, you could say certainly different, but that whole presence to the way things are is the same, if you see what I mean. So presence is not, it doesn't really matter what the situation is that you're present to, but there is this possibility of always being present. And then from that sense of presence might come judgments, evaluations, aspirations, planning, past, present, future, coming and going. All that can take place, which is natural too. And our refuge in Dharma then is this awakening to the way things are. And if we don't do that, I don't think our practice can ever proceed in any kind of skillful way. Because if we never have right understanding, and not have it as a product that you know, I have it now, I've got it now. Not so much that, more like if I never really awaken to the present moment, how can I make any efforts which are skillful and fruitful if I've never really understood what this moment is about? And why I speak to that is because quite often we're good-hearted, we're sincere, you know, we're doing this work with great sincerity, but sometimes we have so many opinions about what we should be achieving in meditation or in our spiritual life, or who we should be, that the mind is so filled with judgments or analysis or commentary on this moment that we never really awaken. We react through some preconceived notion of what I need to get or what I need to become. And that's insidious, isn't it? You know, you sit down and, like, if I had a really neat experience yesterday in meditation, I'll sit down and I'll be trying to get that. I mean, it's such a common thing for all of us to have been through. Oh, that was really neat. Now I'm going to get that again. And that's not Dharma. That's desire. All right. So the way things are, right understanding. Why? And why does the Buddha present that? Well, the whole formulation of the Four Noble Truths is just, he's teaching us that I teach two things, suffering and the end of suffering. Right? And we get that all the time. And if you keep it simple like that, and don't get too complicated, and don't think that Buddhism can answer all questions. Buddhism's not going to answer the question, is Pfizer better than what's the other one? Moderna? I got Pfizer. Or AstraZeneca, or, Buddhism's not there to answer those questions. Or what are we going to do about global warming? You know, it isn't designed to answer those things. It's designed to answer Why do I suffer, and what's the end of suffering? Very, very simple. And the other things we have to figure out. So things like a friend recently died who did the assisted medical dying. Is that what it's called? Right? What's the Buddhist answer to that? I don't know. I mean, it's really, really difficult. It's a really, really difficult question, and each of us has to answer those things in our own ways. So it's not. It's also Buddhism isn't the kind of like Ajahn Sumedho is not the Pope. He doesn't issue encyclicals from Amaravati. This is the way it is, right? He doesn't take positions about this is the way it is. He just says this is the way it is, and that's different, right? So he's not saying anything about those kinds of social things. So if you keep it simple that way, and then you take those Four Noble Truths and you contemplate them deep, you can see that the whole focus of our life is well-being. The whole focus of the Buddhist teaching is well-being, whatever way you want to describe that. And in a sense, there was this really interesting philosopher, I think, Frithjof Schuon, who I read many years ago, kind of perennial philosopher, and he said, we are made for enlightenment. And why he said that, I think, was that as long as we have some mode of discontent and some sense of lack, we're going to try to rectify that. If we're hungry, we're trying to get food. If I've got a thorn in my foot, I'll try to get it out of my foot. If I'm unhappy, profoundly unhappy, I'm going to try to be happy. And the Buddha is suggesting that search for well-being is, and Frithjof Schuon would say that the only way it gets resolved is through liberation, through true freedom, through deep freedom, through this understanding which isn't just limited to facts and so on. So when I have any form of discontent, that is the Dharma that I need to awaken to. Yeah? So if I simply distract the forms of lack or discontent I have and I just keep my mind busy, I miss an opportunity. If I blame that, my discontent is because of you or it or whatever, then I also miss an opportunity. Now, conventionally, blame is okay. Someone is drunk in a car accident and they hurt someone, they get blamed, they have to pay the consequences. So it's not this aspiration to spiritual freedom is not. You have to be careful not to mix up the two venues. One is the social venue, and one is the kind of inner liberation. So if I miss the opportunity to awaken to some form of discontent, and I just replace it with some compensation, some distraction, that discontent will come back because it's become a kind of a pattern in my heart. But if I awaken to it, then that's the Dharma of discontent, isn't it? In whatever way it might be. It might be I feel lonely, or I'm worried because my memory's falling apart, or all manner of things. So anyway, what is the Dharma of discontent? If we take the same attitude, the discontent feels like this. It has arisen. It has a certain tone to it. Then that takes us to the whole issue of craving, wanting and not wanting. And obviously I want to be content, and I don't want discontent. That's my search. That's my search for happiness and well-being. But if I misdirect my attention and settle for something which is less than perfect, then I'll have to go through that cycle again. Now, that might sound very idealistic, and it sounds like you can't have ice cream if you feel depressed. Or you can't watch cat videos if you're bored. It's not an absolutist thing that you should be some kind of a monastic and always just bearing with, but just the principle of the Dharma of discontent is so much against the cultural tendency of, well, if you feel discontent, distracted, do something, be happy, or would you like a muffin? Or this kind of inability to actually awaken to discontent, be it sorrow or loss or whatever. So I think the mature spiritual attitude is that when discontent arises, I'm gonna begin to awaken to it as Dharma, the Dharma of discontent, and that really is the first noble truth. It's understanding suffering, right? And that's different than judgment or analysis. It's this kind of purity of attention with something that you don't want, huh? And that's why it's difficult. You don't want the discontent. You don't want to feel it. You want to alleviate it. You want to rectify it. You want to do something about it. But if I never really awaken to discontent, won't I just be in a kind of reactive mode, doing what I do in order not to feel the discontent? So although it's easy to say this, to awaken to discontent, the knee-jerk reactions that we have around things like that can be so quick that we don't notice them, and we go in kind of cycles of feeling discontent, feeling distracted, feeling discontent, feeling distracted. So it's a very mature person, I think, in a spiritual path that says, oh, I feel horrible. Or loneliness is, oh, this is awful. This loneliness is really, oh, it hurts, or whatever it is. That's, to me, a very kind of mature spiritual practice. And that is what the essence, I think, of the First Noble Truth is, that suffering must be understood. And it doesn't have to be some huge suffering, because we have plenty of low-grade suffering throughout the day, right? That's going on all the time. So you might ask yourself, well, how much of the last week was I truly content, like deeply content? 2 hours total? 24 hours total? 2 minutes total? It's very hard to be content, isn't it? It's a very, very hard thing. And so if you try to be content without looking at discontent, then you tend to be not really looking at what is discontent like? So that's the first step, is awakening to the way things are. So when Luang Por Viradhammo keeps offering us this very, very direct teaching, it's like this, like it doesn't mean you're going to be happy. It's like this, and all of a sudden you look like him, and with a deep laugh as well. No, that's 50 years of practice. But there's lots of, it's like this was difficult for Luang Por, like for all of us. So you have to sort of be interested in your own discontent rather than judgmental or distracted. And one has to kind of make the intentions, and this is what right thinking is about for me. Part of right thinking, Samma Sankappa, the second part of the path is that my thought patterns and which are intentions, are to go closer to that which I don't want. To allow discontent to come into consciousness, and to see the resistance to it, or the fear of it, or the blaming of it on myself or others, see all that. But what does discontent feel like before I think about it? So to experience, say, like we have these two beautiful African violets now on the shrine, kind of a light purple and a dark purple. Now, they're beautiful, and the colors are beautiful to my eye, maybe not to Nirasso's because he's colorblind, but to my eye. It's funny with Nirasso. I'll ask, I've been doing this for 4 years. I'll ask him, what do you think of that color? He says, I'm colorblind. But to my eye, those violets are beautiful. They're beautiful, right? But before I say anything about them, what are they like pre-verbally? Well, they're like that. And then I can't say anything about it. I can. I mean, I can say something about it, but it's very hard to get to experience which is pre-verbal before we describe it as good, bad, indifferent, whatever. Especially about our own emotions and our own being and our own body or whatever. Very hard just to know it in a kind of pure, present dharmic way. And this is Dharma. So what is the Dharma of sight? In the seeing, there is just the seeing. Now, when I do that, as I was saying in the meditation, when I just let the seeing be seeing, that takes me to the silence of the mind. It's no longer about the beauty of the violets, but rather it's about the stillness of the heart. Because now I'm not engaging with the violets in my aesthetic appreciation. I can, nothing wrong with that, but I can also do this other thing of just, in the seeing there is just seeing. And then I notice the silence of the mind. Not dependent, like if the violets say we hadn't watered them properly and I came in 3 days later and they're all wilted. You know, when I saw them, my first reaction is, oh no, my violets. But then I could see that, I could look at that and then say, but seeing is just seeing. It's just like that. And that would bring me back to silence. Well, and I could still get the water or get new violets or whatever, but there is a way of participating with the senses, which is not about the sense object, that it's about the silence of awareness. Okay? You do that with sound. Now do that with a feeling of discontent. You know, that's a bit trickier, isn't it? Because discontent has usually a load of craving in it, a wanting. I don't want this, I want something else. I don't want this discontent, I want contentment. And if we don't notice that, then we react through the craving, pick up another compensation, another experience, and that might satisfy us or not, and then another one and another one and another one. And then our minds are always out into objective experience, and it never has a chance to touch the silence of the unconditioned, the silence and peace of the heart, the silence which is beyond understanding, the different ways we talk about that. And if we've kind of looked at those Four Noble Truths, and we feel some negativity, some resistance to something, we can say, well, I'm suffering for something here. What's happening? Why am I making this a problem? And that, of course, takes us to the problem of attachment. That like let's say like sometimes when I give talks to a group in live format, which was decades ago or whenever it was, when we actually saw human beings for real. when I used to do that. When I did that many years ago, or then if someone is very, anyone who's done public speaking would know this. If anyone isn't fidgeting or just looking at their cell phone, and I'm trying to concentrate on laying out some kind of a topic, then all the time their fidgeting is creating in me discontent. It's obviously their problem, their fault. But it's not. It's not really their fault. It's I don't want them to do that. Right? And what I've learned to do is both give a talk, but also feel, oh, this is what discontent feels like. And sometimes I'll say, stop doing that. But lots of times I'll just feel the discontent and give the talk. And as I know the discontent, it ceases. They're still there. They're still doing their thing. And the discontent ceases because now I've known it, but I haven't attached to it. And this is what non-attachment is. Non-attachment is the capacity to know these things in a way where we let them have their life. We don't attach them. We let them cease. And that ceasing, that cessation of discontent, is not dependent on desire. The other one, like if I'm bored and I need to go to get a movie on Netflix, there's a cessation of the boredom, right? But that cessation was dependent on my desires being fulfilled. And fulfilled desires lead to more fulfillment, need for fulfillment of desires. Not that desire is wrong, but the peace that we're trying to discover, it goes through the doorways of discontent. Quite often it goes through the doorway of loneliness, through the doorway of fear, through the doorway of resentment, or through the doorway of self-doubt, or through the doorway of guilt, or all these different discontents that we feel as human beings. If we can just see that this is just like the violent, not just like it, I mean, it's harder, but that this feeling, like if I have a feeling of guilt for something, and I've done my mea culpas and all of that, and this old memory comes up, what's the pathway to silence and peace there? Guilt comes up. What do? That's discontent. And if I really just bear witness to it, that's hard to do, because I want to blame myself. That's a habit. Or I want, smoke a joint or whatever people do. But just to know guilt is guilt, or fear is fear, or resentment is resentment, just as it is. Bear witness to it. What you're also bearing witness to is the desire not to have. Desire not to have this feeling, which we call vibhavatana, the rejection of it. And also you're witnessing the desire to get something else. So by witnessing this discontent that we have as human beings, we bear witness also to the desire to have something else. And when we bear witness to that desire, then that desire begins to fall away, and that's the definition of nibbana: coolness, peace, the end of desire. And so, like, let's say, as an example, guilt. If guilt comes up, let's say someone did something 10 years ago, and it's a powerful thing, they've done what they could, and now the memory gets triggered. Now, the triggering of that memory is like a horrible feeling. It's very, very horrible. It can be very, very real, and it is real in some sense, but it's unpleasant. And desire doesn't want the unpleasant, it wants the pleasant. But if I can witness to that and say, well, this discontent or this unpleasant is just like this, that's Dharma. That's the Dharma of the feeling of guilt in this sense. It's just the Dharma. And then I stay with that. It's impermanent. It's not a permanent feeling. And if I stay with it, it ceases and desire ceases. And I begin to, there's that piece of the mind which is not dependent on that emotion. But if I don't do that, and then I simply blame myself in the old patterns, or I distract in the old patterns, then I'm never free. Because each time it comes up, I'm the victim. I'm the victim of that. This takes a lot of attention, a lot of courage, doesn't it? To just kind of be with something like that. Like in Thailand, the story I like to tell is I often felt those first few years, it was culturally quite lovely. I love Thai culture, but it certainly wasn't European or Toronto culture. So I often felt culturally very, 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 very alone, because I didn't know the language, and there were no books, and food was different, and people were very kind. So I couldn't really blame anyone. But the feelings of loneliness were quite awful, to say the least, right? And we've all had those kinds of feelings. But then Luang Por Chah would say, bear witness to that. Well, can't you give me more? Can I do something about this? Can I fix it? Don't you have a technique? He says, no. Just bear witness. Just be patient. Oh, God, again, that stupid Buddhist language, be patient. I know. I heard that 100 times. Don't give me that. And, the mind would complain, but he was right. And what he understood that I didn't understand was, it's not the loneliness that's a problem. It was the not wanting of the loneliness. And then I had to just kind of go through the struggle, and he or Luang Por Sumedho keep pushing me back into the Four Noble Truths. What's the problem? Is it loneliness, or is it the desire not to have the loneliness? Well, of course it's the loneliness. That's the problem. No. The problem is the desire not to have the loneliness. And getting that in place is easy to say again, but sometimes it's very hard because you think the problem is the particular mood or situation. Socially, yeah, there can be a problem. Socially, you have to deal with. But in this situation, the problem was the desire not to have this particular mood. And then as I watched that, okay, I began to identify the difference between loneliness and the resistance to loneliness, the not wanting of loneliness, the aversion to loneliness. And so I learned how to have metta for the loneliness, or welcome the loneliness, whatever way I used. And then I used the body, and then I would really feel lonely. But somehow now it was more like an object rather than me being the subject. Before that, I was the subject of the loneliness. Oh, poor me. They don't have any banana yogurt here, or whatever I was whining about. But that is not really awareness, is it? I mean, I kind of know I'm lonely, but I'm just thinking lonely thoughts. That's not awareness of loneliness. That's getting reborn into loneliness, right? That's what we mean by attachment. So the loneliness was kind of culturally necessary. I had no choice. What else could I experience? Western culture, different culture, no English language, no English books, no radio, no television, nothing. Couldn't get away, celibate, and like all I had was loneliness. There's nowhere to go, which is very good actually, because it would be very hard to bear with. If I had distractions, I would have taken distractions. So then, and it's quite often when you get trapped with something, you can't get away from it, can't go forward, can't go back, can't stand still, kind of thing. You have to figure it out. You have no choice. You have to figure it out. And that's where the Four Noble Truths come in. And the question you're asking is, what do I want that I don't have? And what do I have that I don't want? Right? That's the kind of inquiry you're doing. So, and so the struggle with loneliness, at some point, I mean, I can't remember so many years ago, but at some point, I probably just figured out that the problem was desire not to have. Having said that, the loneliness was oftentimes broken by the joy of being with Ajahn Chah, the fascination of being in alms round. So it wasn't like, I wasn't clinically depressed, say. If someone is clinically depressed, well, that's another issue. That needs therapy, and there are other things. But this was just your, garden variety young guy in another country kind of loneliness. But those, like that kind of initial struggle with using the Four Noble Truths is very formative, isn't it? Very formative into how one approaches all of the discontents of life. And so then I began to see, whether it was with fear or jealousy or whatever things I was going through, or sickness. I had a lot of, what did I have? I had scrub typhus. That was pretty horrible. And I never had malaria, but all kinds of stuff that go on in jungles. And then what's the problem? Well, I don't want scrub typhus. Well, of course you don't want scrub typhus. So you do your best you can medically, but then what is it? This is the feeling of being absolutely miserable. Yeah, misery feels this way. And all of a sudden there is some space and some distance. Misery feels like this. Bodily feeling, like with scrub typhus. I think I was in hospital like 10 days on drips, and it was pretty serious. Couldn't eat anything, and like incredibly thirsty, and it wasn't it was an okay hospital, I guess, but the misery was very profound, and the loneliness was compounded then. Not only I feel lonely, but I was sick, and then all the time. Well, what's the problem? Is it the sickness, or is it the desire not to have the sickness? And no, I mean, they're dealing with you medically the best they can. What's the problem? So that's the kind of questioning, I mean, that Luang Por Chah constantly asked us to bring into our own consciousness. Yeah? What's the problem? Where's the suffering? What's the end of suffering? And then that kind of inquiry, then I started to get some distance, mentally, I suppose, around the feeling of scrub typhus. I never want it again. I hope no one ever gets it. But those lessons then teach me about headaches or whatever we all have. So whether it's emotional, or whether it's historically something, whether it's physical, the knowing of the three types of craving is very, very important. So we have, as you know, bhava tanha is the kind of craving to create something else, to be somewhere else, to become something. And then vibhava tanha is the resistance. I don't want that, the kind of resistance to pain or people or whatever it is. And kama tanha, which is it's this defined essential desire. I see it more and more as like consuming experience. When I'm caught in the consumption of experience, whether it's mental experience or video experience or whatever, as long as I'm consuming objects, objective experience, I'm not, as I was saying yesterday or earlier today, when was it? I'm not available to silence. I'm not available to the unconditioned because my mind is out. And that's the difficulty of modern media. You know, people, monks probably talk about this all the time, but people are in their gadgets, and there's nothing immoral about that, but their mind is outside into objects, then they're not available to the silence of the mind. And if you look at that, say, like in a monastery, we ask people to kind of give up their cell phones and iPads and things like that, and we, like a guest, we say, where you can have internet access, what do we say, an hour a week. Now that is severe. You what? I'm never coming to your monastery. And you know, when you think about it, like when I was in Thailand, I could get an aerogram a month. And the young guys don't even know what an aerogram is. What a month? Like a phone call? Are you kidding? You'd had to go 20 kilometers for a phone call. Now you say to someone, oh, you have to give up the cell phone. You what? Or you have to give it up for half an hour. You know, so our culture is so drawn into objects because they're fascinating, right? And again, there's nothing moral about that. And I like to look at woodworking videos because I like woodworking. But then that becomes this what we call kama tanha, where I'm always consuming experience. And if that becomes like a habit which I can't put down, then I try to just be without the distracting, or without the object that I absorb into. I get restless, right? So we all know that. So from that restlessness, if I'm doing Four Noble Truths, oh, restlessness feels like this. And then I bear witness to it. The restlessness ceases, and then my mind doesn't need the object. But you can see, if you have an iPhone next to you and you feel restless, what's the odds you're not going to pick it up when you feel restless? 0 to 1. Unless you've changed your mind, you know, unless you've really trained your mind. So again, it's not a moral thing, but what you begin to appreciate in the meditative life is the beauty of that silence, and the deep love that can be in that. You can be in that silence. It becomes like a much more desirable, I guess, much more attractive, whatever, to the fulfillment of your life than a cat video or whatever people do. But you could see if some person comes to the monastery. I mean, I'm obviously no one's ever going to visit us again, not just because of COVID, but because of this. But you can see if they come into the monastery, first of all, there's the shock. Although they've read it on the website, no internet for 1 week, they don't realize what is going to affect them. And then they get restless. What do I do? Well, just watch your mind. You what? But then they're doing some pretty profound work. They're looking at restlessness as an object. Oh, this is what restlessness feels like. And then they get the insight, oh, with distraction as condition, the result, it's not free. It's not a freebie. The result is this distraction. I get that as a result. And if I'm really serious about spiritual life, I want to be with the silence of the mind, not the need for distraction. So I bear witness to my vipaka kamma. This is called resultant kamma. Sometimes when we talk about vipaka kamma in Buddhism, it sounds like past lives. I don't know anything about that. I don't have any psychic abilities, but I do know that I have lived a certain number of years this life. And having lived in this life, I know there are habits. And that's what we call resultant kamma. So if someone is absorbed into externalities and then they don't have them, then that restlessness is vipaka kamma. And that's desire. That's the desire to have the comfortable, to have the familiar. So if you want to if you're interested in like what was the Buddha's realization about, you have to begin to bring up the language of desirelessness. Desirelessness is a very, very powerful word. Desirelessness. Now, if I'm sitting and meditating and I have a desire to phone someone, and I bring up desirelessness as the mirror, as the attitude, then I will see desire as an object. If I see desire as an object and I witness it, then it will cease. And in its cessation is the third noble truth. The end of desire is nibbana, is peace. So what I try to cultivate, we were doing this walking meditation and such like. I said, can you cultivate a sense of composure and an attitude? And what I find very, very helpful is the attitude of desirelessness. It's an interesting word to put in there because you can't get desirelessness, right? It doesn't compute. I'm going to get desirelessness when? Desirelessness has to be now. Through letting go. So if you have a sense of composure, what that means, and then you put in an attitude, desirelessness, then as your mind starts to fantasize or go somewhere, no, desirelessness. It's like this, then you're using actually all the noble truths, moving towards the cessation of desire, moving towards peace. 2:15. I've done my bit. So that's quite a lot of things to think about. I think Mark, we have the walking meditation now, yeah? Before we do the walking meditation, can I just make a comment on the lying meditation? Again, I do it quite a bit. So I find sometimes that my lower spine, I have just some problems in the lower spine, nothing big, but energy gets trapped there. And when I do the lying posture, then that energy gets released. And sometimes my legs will shake for like 20 minutes. And it's not unpleasant, but it's not pleasant, that kind of thing. So I just did it after lunch. I did the lying meditation, and the body was like that for about 20 minutes, and then all the energy system just settled down really, really nicely, and the body was calm and the mind was calm. So if you are experimenting with that, that's been a big part of my experiment with this, is these sort of strange energy releases, which I've always found actually very profitable. And one of the things that was very common for me, I'll get a little feeling of a pinprick that normally I would scratch maybe. But now the posture is not to not move. And then that pinprick grows into a kind of release, either in the arm or in the legs, like that. And that seems to, for me, I don't know, I've never read much about this stuff. I just can share it with you, but it seems to then create a kind of, for me, a balance of energy, where the silence is there, the sound of silence is there, the body is kind of really in a neat space, but the mind's not asleep. The mind's not asleep, the mind's quite awake. So again, if you want to experiment with that during this walking, you can. Otherwise, see if you can have the sense of composure if you're doing walking, and then the sense of like an attitude, desirelessness.